So many people I see today, especially like popular YouTubers, it's just like, they optimized their work, or they hacked their day, or
Mm.
they figured out what to eat or not to eat. I'm stunned that people would actually consider me to be some type of robot or some type of hyper-connected cyborg when I'm the most human person I've ever met. I don't optimize my day. For what purpose?
Mm.
Everybody's literally becoming a robot, but laughing at me.
Yeah.
I optimized me, not my day.
I'm Ranjor, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or a new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them. Today I'm talking to Chris Dancy, also known as the most connected man on Earth. Chris is a TED speaker and the author of Don't Unplug, How Technology Saved My Life and Can Save Yours Too. He was featured on Showtime's Darknet, the cover of Businessweek, and interviewed by Wall Street Journal, NPR, the BBC, Fox News, and Wired. Chris entered the public dialogue concerning digital health as the media started to focus on wearable technology. He earned his most connected moniker by utilizing up to 700 sensors, devices, applications, and services to track, analyze, and optimize his life, from his caloric intake to his spiritual well-being. This quantification enabled him to see the connections of otherwise invisible data, resulting in dramatic upgrades to his health, productivity, and quality of life. Today, he's a noted keynote speaker and executive workshop retreat facilitator, and guides organizations and audiences on a journey, a disruptive, breathtaking journey, into the future of computing when behavior becomes the ultimate interface. We spoke in mid-July 2022, but I actually met Chris almost a decade ago on an online meditation retreat, which didn't afford a lot of time to get to know him, but was enough to spark my interest. After seeing his writing, his book, and his continuous reinvention, I was really excited to check in with him and learn about his journey, his rituals, and how he uses technology to become more, not less human. Chris is an engaging speaker and fascinating thinker, so this did not disappoint. We talked about how he used technology to gain a measure of control and process childhood trauma, how he found his way into self-tracking and became the world's most connected man, what it means to be connected at all times with over 700 devices and services tracking every behavior and activity into a personal database, why he believes recording our personal histories is worth doing, how he categorizes activities and makes sense of them, what he discovered from looking at this trove of data, the outsized importance of sufficient light, pleasant soundscapes, and rest, receipts as a spiritual instrument, and his version of techno-paganism, bringing ancient rituals and modern technology together. I take with me a clear understanding of the enormous potential for self-exploration and understanding that's hiding in the data that's already being collected about us by all the services we use, and the importance of taking charge and hacking our own interface with technology, which works for our goals and values. This conversation is one of a dozen or so weekly conversations we already have lined up for you with hackers, designers, thinkers, authors, entrepreneurs, and activists who are working to change our world for the better. So follow this podcast on your favorite podcast app or head over to remakepod.org to subscribe. And now let's jump right in with Chris Dancy. All right, so I'm sitting here with Chris Dancy. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to see you.
Yeah. And so we like to start this conversation by connecting with what's going on in the world today. And a lot is always going on. And asking, what's it like to be Chris Dancy these days in the world today?
I'm really enjoying leaning into getting older. I'm in my mid-50s now. So being a mid-50-year-old in the world, it feels both prescient but also strangely detached
Hmm.
because a lot of the problems I think I'm seeing, I'm not going to have to deal with,
Hmm.
like when they get really bad. But I also have, I would suggest maybe a little extra wisdom than maybe some of my contemporaries, just because if you make it to your 50s and you're in semi good health, you're kind of a very small percentage of the population of the world.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So were you looking at the news or looking at things developing? Are you feeling checked out? Are you feeling, I'll do what I
Oh,
can, but it's not my problem? What's the feeling tone?
no. I'm much more of a get shit done, get stuff done. I don't know if I can swear,
Sure.
but I'm more of a get shit done person. So I'm real involved in the problems that are around me, whether it be climate or inequity. I build stuff all the time. I mean, I'm building a system now for my villageoffonda.com, where I live, to help them deal with some of the climate and other issues. So
Hmm.
checked out, I think I'm sorry if that came out that, I'm in my 50s, so I feel kind of, lucky I won't be around. No, I'm real active in it. I just think I
Hmm.
don't have a lot of time for people who talk about it, talk about the problems of the world. To me, you know, there's just so much talk. I don't know. And I'm also gay and in my 50s, so this wasn't my first pandemic.
Hmm.
Right? This wasn't my first rolling back of rights. All the kind of stuff that people, at least in the United States, are dealing with, this isn't my first rodeo. So I
Hmm.
feel prepared, maybe particularly prepared, but also outrageously distressed at how often we have to go through a lot of this. We shouldn't have this happening again.
Yeah. I think it gets too much if you're plugged into the social media and the news. There's always some new outrage. There's always something new to worry about. How do you not check out to some extent? How do you not say I need to protect
Uh,
my own sanity? And in some communities that's even worse. I have a pretty balanced feed,
yeah.
but if you go to the extreme, it's all outrage all the time.
But we were talking about this before we started the show. I get a lot of, like you're saying, I'm pretty plugged in, but I'm also plugged in like a lot of really just esoteric out there stuff. I think where some people might have conspiracy, I have occultism.
Hmm.
Um, and I think you can be really overly plugged in to better things.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe the quality of what you're connecting with is something that we're not fully
Yeah.
thinking about. So, to start this exploration, this is a question that we always ask in the beginning, which is what's something you learned or discovered in childhood or early in life that is still with you today, still guides you today, or drives you today?
It's going to be silly,
Go
but
ahead.
and my grandma told me growing up that your hair is your crown. And no matter what you do, make sure you have nice hair. So it doesn't matter. I mean, it's probably not as profound as you need, but you specifically said childhood, and that's the first one I think of.
Yeah. Well, so you tell actually in your talks and stuff, you talk about a childhood that wasn't the easiest, and you talk about experiencing poverty as well.
Mm.
And is there something in that you feel continues to this day, something you brought with you from those times? Something
I
that
mean, a lot of trauma, a tremendous amount of complex trauma. That's so cliche these days. But, to your point, I mean, it was just my brother and I was physically abused until I was almost 18. My father struck me a week before my 18th birthday was the last time I was physically struck. Um, there's just the psychological abuse of growing up with parents who were really wealthy for a short period of time and then lost everything. And then having people make fun of you because you don't have money. And then also growing up, just the dumb things. I was always a little heavier than my friends, as in I carried a little extra weight. My front teeth were crossed.
Hmm.
So people made fun of that. So I got a lot, and then being a ginger, I got a lot of that. So, and then being gay as a teenager, you know what I mean? In the 80s. Right.
Hmm.
I just feel like I had it from every direction, but I really didn't have any lessons. All of the stuff that I learned from that part were all almost adaptive responses to just constant abuse. What did I carry with me to this day? I have a wickedly, almost supernatural ability to disassociate in real time on demand. So if someone is making me feel scared, just kind of coming out of my mind, because I used to do that when I would get hit. But I don't know. I think if I were to sum up all of those years into one phrase that I learned that I carry with me every day, it's you can't save your ass and your face at the same time. You really can't physically be safe and mentally okay, or you can't really be mentally safe and physically okay. Like there's two ways of existing in the world, just never will happen at the same time. You can get away from a problem or you can be in a problem and be better with it, but you can't do both.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I love anything that's a play on words. So
Yeah.
save your ass and your face at the same time. I just love that.
So how do computers and technology feed into that? Because I think I heard you mention that they brought a measure of control that you felt when you use a computer that, you're in control.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think my age is really interesting because I had my first computer in 1979 and I used one and I was 10. No, I was almost 11 in 1979. So I used a computer during literally my formative years. And they did. I brought an outrageous measure of control. They also brought something at the time that no one else had, whether we were rich or poor, whether I was being beat or not. And that was I could do things with computers that my father couldn't or my parents couldn't. Or, I would go make money. I was 14 working at a doctor's office. I lied about my age. I told them I was 16 because I knew how to back up at that time tandies, old tandies. And they both simultaneously gave me things to control, data, spreadsheets, all the things Lotus 123. I had organizers, all those things most people now take for granted. I had a decade before most people, but they also allowed me to make a livelihood. So to me, I've always seen technology as just the only way of escape when it comes to suffering and being human. There needed to be another channel to put all of that pain. They still are to today. I just see everyone putting their pain in computers today, it's no longer just me.
Yeah, or putting it in or numbing it sometimes, right? Because I find that sometimes I run into my phone instead of handling something tough that I'm feeling.
I think phones and technology for numbing and distraction serve a really vital purpose. We can't always have someone near us. And we aren't really, at least the people I know, really weren't taught the skills to deal with how to navigate sensations and thoughts growing up. I mean, they're not taught in schools, at least here where I live. I try not to be too judgy about people running to their phones. At least they're running to something. Today, we have a lot of people running to guns and shooting churches and grocery stores. So I'd much rather have a population numbed on their phone than shooting each other over bread and not using a blinker.
Yeah, that's fair. So I'm interested in this journey because you are the most connected man in the world, and you started collecting.
According to Google.
According to Google, it almost sounds like a superhero, most connected man.
I know. It feels like it.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, how did you become most connected man? What was the aha moment or a few aha moments that led you to start connecting?
I think, there's two ways to look at the title most connected, the moniker that I have. I mean, there's obviously, I think the most obvious one, which is how the heck did that happen? How can I go to almost any country in the world and put in most connected into Google and find you? Why are you the first thing? So, and that's just like, okay, we could spend all day talking about how I made a career out of a search term, right? Because I don't really have a regular job anymore. I get paid to be the most connected person. We can talk about all that later. So that's one conversation. But also, I think the next obvious question a lot of people should ask when, they hear about most connected is connected to what? To people, to technologies? There's a lot of things. So those are the two, I think, more kind of philosophical things we could debate about most connected. But in reality, I turned 40 in 2008. I was 100 pounds heavier. I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I was drinking excessively. I've been in and out of rehabs and jails for most of my 20s and 30s. I was a mess. But if you looked at the technology around me was pristine, right? I just built the cleanest, most well-designed data systems. I mean, it was just amazing. And it just dawned on me one day, like, why can't I organize my life like I can a SQL database or an Oracle database? Why is it so much harder? Then I thought to myself, well, I don't have the same inputs that I do when someone hands me terabytes of data and says, make this hospital run. But the reality was I did. I just didn't have access to it. So then it just, the idea came to me in probably early 2007. I started noticing just like when I was searching my search history, how much I was just telling about myself, but not being, because, you don't see your search history full time. I was like, okay, this is a thing. And then I was like, okay, if search history tells me that, what does just history tell me? Like search history is what you need at that moment. History is what you've done with that time. And then it was just like, why don't I just save those two things? And then it was just like, oh gosh, if I'm posting to social media, why don't I save what I'm posting? And it just became this thing in the beginning using Yahoo Pipes where every time I did anything online, a record was saved to a Google Calendar. It was my first API call. So by 2008, 2009, I just had hundreds and thousands of data entries in the calendar, little mini appointments. And then it dawned on me, this is nice because I can see it now in time and I can search it, but it's not understandable. So I started creating categories for the things that got saved to the calendar, things that were better had one color, things that were less desirable for me had another color. And then that color coding really helped, but it didn't prioritize, it didn't weight things. And that's literally what turned on the light bulb. And I said, I need a weighting system for just life data. And I just used Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's like really simple, it's like, okay, wow. Well, now that this isn't just good or bad, posting this is actually, a physical need. And once I started weighting, then the calendar just was color coded and weighted. And suddenly I wrote it. Then the last thing I wrote was a feedback system that sent me something on my phone in 2011 that basically just said, this is happening. I think you should do this. Just simple pattern bookings. And it just changed. And then a year later, I was at a conference and somebody who worked at a magazine saw my calendar writing information in it in real time. He goes, what is doing that? And I told him. And he said, this is amazing. And I was in a magazine and then on the cover of a magazine and a TV show and a book. And here we are.
Amazing. And you're not the first one in your family that had this tendency to collect and record things.
Yeah. I lost my mother in 2003. And growing up, my mom, she worked a lot. My father had a hard time holding a job. My mom worked a lot. But my mom was a compulsive organizer, much better than I am, but she did all analog, right? She would write really long letters to the family. It didn't matter. Like she'd write you a really long letter, even if you lived with her, just to let you know how she was feeling. That's how she journaled. She also made lots of lists. She was also the keeper of the family calendar. So every year she had this ritual of going through last year's calendar and putting the important dates and events onto next year's calendar. So yeah, I think a lot of these collection habits come from my mother, who used analog technology to escape and organize and control.
Yeah, there's a beautiful story, and then it leads into you starting to collect the stuff that's available for us, right? The stuff that's not always made easy to access, but the stuff that are existing behavior inside of these digital apps that we live with and operate with already is generating this data. We just don't collect it and have access to it. And so tell me about what sort of things did you start collecting and how did it evolve to where it is today?
Well, I hate to say it, but you have to go back to the 80s. Some of the first things I collected were like just things I purchased and put them in spreadsheets. And that might sound weird as a teenager keeping their possessions in spreadsheets. And maybe not now, but in the 80s, it was definitely weird. But it allowed me to externalize. Because I didn't put the records and tapes I bought. I had one of the largest Michael Jackson collections in the world. And Michael Jackson's people, even were marveled by this, not the collection as much as the fact that I had organized it. There was a period of time where they're like, why doesn't Michael know as much about Michael Jackson as Chris Dancy? And that's a story I've never even talked about. But collecting data is great, but like externalizing it is, I think, what I really liked. Because like having my collection in a book, right? It sounds silly, but like being able to see what you own is different than just owning it. You know what I mean? From the things that I owned in the 80s to the 90s, it was really the early 90s, I started really organizing, keeping my calendar. So I was in my early 20s. Again, everybody has a calendar today, but I was doing a lot of weird things with it, where I was putting feelings and treating it more like a diary. And when I look back at the archives of those things now, I'm overwhelmed by even my own prescience when it comes to how did you know? Like, what drove me? Like, there were no examples of the quantified self, but it just seemed natural. It just seemed like the right thing to do. To address your question specifically, by the time I got to the early 2000s, and I was thinking about collecting things, beyond this, and I was starting to build the system that runs my life today, it was just like, what are the most important things? Like, for me, when I first started, heavy duty. It was the physical stuff, the what you eat, how much you slept, again, base Maslow, right? But over the last, 15 years since I started collecting data really heavy, that's really morphed into sometimes those things aren't the most important. Today, it's more about making sure that whatever I collect falls into almost like a values bucket. So now it's like, okay, is the data here representative? If someone were to look at my life through the data that I've collected of myself, does it show what I value? Right? Today, it's very deliberate. For example, this chat with you, the calendar appointment, the time, et cetera, will all fall under a service bucket of my values. I have 6 main values that every moment of my day go under, service being the highest. And that's important for me. I have a values budget. 30% of my time has to be in service. I try to do 20% of my time toward my health. It seems weird to even say it out loud just because it's so normal. But when I say it out loud, it seems weird. It seems difficult to say because I don't know how people will feel about that. Because I'm finding a lot of people are really starting to understand me, but a lot of people are also really starting to be freaked out by me. So I stutter sometimes.
Yeah, there's assumptions in that simple sentence. I try to put 20% of my time towards my health or 30% towards service. The assumption is that you know what your time is going for at that granularity, and you can easily calculate. And most people have no idea how the time breaks down looking back 1 week, 1 month. You have to sit down and really trace what you did. I used to be not very scheduled, and today, because I have a business and I'm on a lot of meetings and we do workshops and podcast interviews, we get to the point where almost every minute of my life is scheduled. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think I may have been happier when there was no schedule, but I can tell you what I did because it's on the calendar, because that's how I manage it. But it's really interesting. So but to give a sense to people of the type of things that you track, I think you have health and work apps, fitness, spirituality apps, financial transactions, all of these trackers that you wear on your body and in the house. I think you have even like the light levels and the sound levels, and at some point I read like 700 sensors, devices, applications, and services that all tie together into this thing. What does it look like today? If someone was to do an inventory of your system, give us a sense of what's in there.
Yeah. So everything, falls basically in 3 levels. So you've got your biological, physical things, your environmental things, and then your behavioral things. So the biological stuff is the stuff that you would think of: heart rates, sleep, etc. I sometimes used to refer to this as hard data. It's the stuff that's hard to fake. Your body's doing what it's doing. The behavioral stuff is the stuff you do once you have mastered paying attention to what your body and mind are doing. And that's like how you're spending money and the music you're listening to and what you're doing with your attention, for like a really simple way to put it. Then beyond there, at the top level, if you can master understanding what your body's doing and what you're doing with a body, your behavior, the last thing you'd really want to master is then the environmental variables, to your point earlier, the noise levels, the sensory inputs to your life. Understanding and being able to place something in a realm or a domain, biological, behavioral, and environmental, is really kind of, to me, the first step in understanding yourself. A lot of times when people have a problem in their life, they just throw it and they go, okay, it was too noisy for me to work. Well, was it too noisy, or did you not get enough sleep? Or did you put headphones on and listen to a lot of really loud music? So right away, you've got the 3 areas right there: the sleep, the behavior with the music, and then the sound, which then is the environment. When I talked about 700 sensors and systems and stuff back in 2008, those are just the ones I counted. There wasn't even like the systems connected to systems. So, today, all of that stuff is just so passive. I even have an Amazon one that watches me speak and tells me what type of language am I using. Is it happy or sad? But a lot of things do that. Grammarly does that. A lot of things do that today. But making sure that you understand, if you have a piece of data about yourself, where would you put it? So many people I see today, especially like popular YouTubers, it's just like, they optimized their work, or they hacked their day, or they figured out what to eat or not to eat. I'm stunned that people would actually consider me to be some type of robot or some type of hyper-connected cyborg when I'm the most human person I've ever met. I don't optimize my day. For what purpose? Everybody's literally becoming a robot, but laughing at me. I optimized me, not my day.
But I think that inherent in this massive effort to track and record and document and preserve, there's an assumption that this is a valuable thing to do. And so I have two questions about that, and I believe that it is, but I want to ask the tough questions. Let's talk to the skeptics who might be listening and see if we can explain to them the value of documenting, tracking, quantified self as a way of life. What do you gain out of it?
Yeah. No, I mean, at the end of the day, nothing. There is no obvious benefit to doing anything. But then if that's your position, then just die. All right. I think a lot of people who are skeptical at what I do are lacking a compass of their own. They see anything that anyone does. And skeptics are really interesting people because they offer all of us a mirror onto questioning our own reality. And I think there's a conversation to be had there. But I think to any skeptic saying, is it really worth all the time and effort you put into it? A, I think you're making a lot of assumptions about how much time and effort I put into it. It's really not a lot of effort. And then B, I really think it's important to prove we exist. If to no one else, ourselves. And I think the more people evaporate into silicon and the more they dissolve into devices, the more skeptical they become because there's nothing solid left. And it goes back to what I was talking about, being able to log and physically print what you own. So many people don't think about their health until they go to the doctor's office and look at their chart. But now charts are even digital, right? So it's overwhelming, I would say. If you're really skeptical, just spend a week creating something physical about yourself. That might be a journal you write on paper. That might be just saving the receipts, the paper ones, ask for them from the things you purchase. And at the end of the week, just look at them. It's a real shame that everything we actually save is something we're supposed to consume or cherish, but there's nothing we're supposed to treasure. And, I think if you save something, it should be yourself. And the first thing you should do with it is treasure it. It's proof that you spent time, and it's proof of how you spent your time. Receipts are such spiritual instruments, but we really don't use them that way.
Oh, that's a
like
quote.
Physical cash receipts.
That's a quote we can use as a headline. Receipts are as spiritual. So you talk about the value of identity, and you talk about the value of perspective. So help me understand what kind of.
You've done your homework.
Thanks. Yeah. No, we try. But what's the value of perspective that you can get from all of this data?
Perspective is such a weird animal. So much of perspective comes from, just where you are at the time, if you choose to have it. For me, I think over the last 20 years of kind of this journey, it's really moved from like my data as perspective for me to gauge where I am to now I'm in that stage of my life where I'm really the data I create as a perspective around my legacy. What will my family think when I'm gone? That sort of thing. But again, I think at its simplest term, receipts, perspective about your financial health, but not only your financial health, but your financial direction. Steps, perspective about how you live, what you do with your physicality, sleep, how much you care for your mind. I think so many people want better sleep, but they don't think about why. It's just like, well, I need it. I don't feel well. And then they get better sleep and then they're like, okay, now what can I do with all that energy? Or I meet a lot of people who want to save time. Chris, just teach me to do this so I can save time. And I go, well, tell me what you're going to use with the time. Well, I don't know. Then why do you want to save it? I am stunned by how many people are saving time as if it's actually going someplace.
Yeah, there's no time bank that you get to reuse later.
Right? So you'll never really have perspective until you understand what you're doing with the time. You can't really understand what you're doing with your time until you have a record of it. That record could be a calendar, it can be a receipt, but it's something. I love perspective because simple things like being in a plane and seeing the land, or using Google Earth and looking at different places and seeing how things are stick together. Those are perspectives most humans will never didn't have 100 years ago. 100 years ago, no one could look out a plane window or scan Google Earth or use Street View to drive around a town they've never been in. This is bordering on supernatural, the amount of perspective we can have. But we take it so much for granted. That makes me really sad.
So some of the insights that you've come up with are pretty subtle, right? But these subtle effects that different things in your life can have on how you're doing and then the type of day that you're going to have. What are some things, small practical things that had an outsized effect or that surprised you?
Light. Light. Do not underestimate light. And I don't just mean sunlight. I mean the light in your house, the light from your phone, the light of a candle. Light has, again, supernatural.
Yeah.
Light is the element one to perspective. So many people don't even think about it. Just lights are on or off. As you get older, you're like, oh, a dimmer would be cool. And today you can have, like I have all LED that can be any color at the drop of a hat lights. Outside perspective, I'd say number one, light. I'd say something else, outside perspective, is sound. So again, you're going to notice some I'd say common themes, some very sensory things. People don't, again, they treat it like it's normal. But things you take for granted, you probably should spend some time just noticing. So I would start with light and sound, et cetera. One of the hacks I used to teach people a long time ago is if you're trying to lose some weight, spend a week listening to someone else's music. So ask your friends to share a playlist of theirs and, anything to get your mind out of the programmed reality of I'm going to do this next, right? Flip on the lights, put on your playlist, get in the shower. Having this relationship with lighting, like my house subtly gets darker toward the end of the day to slow me down. So, other outsized things I think a lot of people just take or underestimate is just practicing. This could sound really silly, but practicing deliberate rest. And rest can look different for everyone. Again, you can just sit with your phone. You can read a book. You can plant a tree. But I think there needs to be you need to be deliberate about that behavior. And I always tell people, if you spend a week just saying, I'm going to take 30 minutes, you don't even have to meditate. I used to tell people, please meditate daily. And I realized that was getting me nowhere fast. But telling people to willfully create 30 minutes to do something that's not something they have to do. Every moment you spend doing something you don't have to do is a moment you got to experience the world. I try to encourage people to see their behavior like I do, which is it's okay to be automated. I have to be automated. I had to come to this podcast. I had to put on a shirt and some makeup in case it was going to be a visual, right? I understand there are things we have to do. But the autonomy you're seeking to get away from the overwhelming anxiety and depression is found in the time you spend doing things that have nothing to do with what has to get done. And in those moments, you are free.
100%. So my journey into spirituality actually started with the Sabbath. And I was a very non-spiritual, non-religious, atheist guy. But I went on a few dates with a woman who is more traditional. And she said, she really enjoyed the Sabbath with her religious relatives. And I was like, what's to enjoy about the Sabbath? It's just a bunch of restrictions. And she said, no, it's not about the restrictions. It's about the space that the restrictions create and what naturally arises in that space. And that, as a designer, that made me curious. I was like, okay, let me try. And that's exactly the rule I had for the Sabbath was I'm not allowed to do anything productive. I'm not allowed to do anything that's for a distant purpose. I only am allowed to do things that are done for their own sake. And that made a huge difference in my life. So everything you say resonates as something that I've learned probably only in my late 30s to early 40s to start thinking about. And it makes a huge amount of difference.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I remember it was probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I learned, and I apologize to anybody who knows this if I sound like, how did you not know that? But a lot of kitchen appliances now come with a Sabbath mode, like refrigerators and ovens and things. And I just thought to myself, the fact you can have a Sabbath mode on your oven or fridge just says so much more about our thoughtful design of some technology.
Mm,
and our lack of thoughtfulness around ourselves,
mm. Yeah, we don't have seventh mode for people.
You're right, but like your phone has do not disturb, which is like this really just blunt object, right?
Mm,
But now they've entered focused modes, which is a little
yeah.
bit of a softer blunt object. I don't know. It's overwhelming to me. We're doing such a good job designing technology and such a poor job raising people.
Yeah. And I think some of it, I mean, to be forgiving, and some of it is that technology is very new and developing very fast. And these practices have evolved over thousands of years of without a lot of
Yeah.
change. I think we're playing a catch-up game a little bit.
Yeah. And I really struggle because I think the other side of that is some people who go on these like digital Sabbaths where they're like, okay, I'm going to take a week and not use any technology. And I just find that to be so outrageously privileged and unequal and disgusting. So many people can't afford a day without technology, right? They're just
Right.
they need it for their kids or their jobs or whatever. And I just think I had a real problem between 2013 and 2016 with like the polarization around unplugging. That's why I called my book Don't Unplug. Just because I think it's just so thoughtless to tell someone to put your phone down.
Mm. Yeah.
Tell your wife to stop loving you, tell your kids to grow up. There's some things you just can't do. So, but we're past that now. I don't think people still say unplug. They might, but they run away from anyone who tells you to get away from technology. Run.
Well, I may be guilty. So I'm not. I've never gone around telling people unplug, but I recommend this app called Freedom to a lot of people. And Freedom is not total. Have you used it? It's a kind of it controls access in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, Freedom's been around for a long time. I use Rescue Time, but again, I like Rescue Time because it gives you that out of back. Where Freedom's really again more of a blunt force.
Yeah, but I found that I in managing myself, I would never tell another person you have to do this, but
yeah,
not having the willpower to stay away from social media and the news in the mornings where I really think it's better for you to not do. So I block it. They don't work until noon, right? They just don't work on any device. And then I have free evenings to myself as well. So I decided that at 10 p.m., no more social media, no more news. I think what it does for me is help me think about, have my better self think about what I would like my life to be, and then encode that into the software so that my tired, busy self is not the one making that decision, but my best self.
Absolutely. And again, I think you're not telling people to use Freedom. You're using Freedom. And therein lies the difference.
You're listening to Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. If you're listening on a podcast app, you already know how to follow podcasts. So please follow this one. If you're listening in a browser, just go to remakepod.org to find links to all the major podcast players where you can follow our show. So tell me about Don't Unplug. It's very well written. There's very good arguments for the practices and what we can learn from them. And I think you bring a lot of technical know-how that informs these decisions. So when you talk about social media and you kind of explain, some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves about social media, or when we talk about
don't binge watch your friends.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's a biggie.
I love this quote. To understand social media and its place in our lives, we need to look at the role it plays in mediating our connections. Yeah. So we tend to it becomes invisible to us, and we don't understand that our relationship to our friends and to many different things in our life is now mediated by a company trying to make money.
Yeah. I think we're so past even the mediation stage. Remember, I wrote Don't Unplug in 2017. It was released in 2018, right? So here we are, 5, 6, 7 years later. But I think nowadays people require an interface to mediate their relationships. Right. I don't even think it's it would have made more sense had I written that and said that in 2012. right? But it's too late. No one knows how to have friends that don't have options.
Yeah.
Nobody knows how to be connected to people you can't mute.
Right.
Nobody knows how to work with someone you can't email and be passive aggressive with. The mediation of our relationships has turned into a requirement. I mean, and then we doubled down all of that in 2015 with our mediation to our bodies. I mean, how many people, will not rest until their rings are closed or their step count is caught? They don't have a relationship with their bodies. They have a relationship with the data of their bodies. And again, I'm not being judgy. I went through that too. But yeah, I think Don't Unplug, when I wrote it, first, I think I was really lucky first to get paid to write a book, right? Just to be honest with you, let's talk about the reality of getting to write a book. The book was really, it was never called Don't Unplug. The book was supposed to be called I Am You Tomorrow. The publisher changed it to Don't Unplug. So the book originally was called I Am You Tomorrow, How Technology Saved My Life and Save Yours Too. But they changed it to Don't Unplug, How Technology Saved My Life and Save Yours Too. And I liked the original, where the book originally was supposed to be, which is, you can pretend you can fight this, but you're just going to end up like Chris Dancy at some point. So no matter what you think about what I'm doing, I'll see you in the future, or I'll see me in you.
Right.
And that's going to give me an upper hand, because there's nothing you can manipulate faster than your past. So if I'm dealing with a lot of people behaving the way I used to, then I basically got a giant set of people I can mess with in real time, because I know how that story ends. But the publisher thought, that's a little weird and twisted. Why don't we just kind of do this more kind of Don't Unplug? I'm like, okay, because that's more of a positive message, Don't Unplug. And that's literally what you end up reading. The book in its essence is a collection of stories that I would want to have just in public, so I don't ever have to be outed or canceled. I was pre-cancel culture. I called it cancel insurance. And then the rest of it was more of a what would I want? I have an 11-year-old. What would I want her to know in the future, regardless of what happens with technology and the interface and all that stuff? So they're more kind of, simple life lessons on being a good cyborg. I don't know. I'm really fortunate that I got to even spend time thinking about it.
Yeah, and it is, like you say, it's this beautiful progression from starting with pretty mundane things like social media and entertainment, and then your opinions and work, and then money and health, and it goes deeper and deeper, right? It's a spiral that goes deeper, and spirituality. So I think that's where we will end today. But before we go there, I want to ask about the optimization game, the optimization problem that you brought up already, I think, a couple of times.
Yeah.
Because we know that you pursue what you measure. And a lot of self-tracking is providing you this data that can in return change your behavior in unbeneficial ways by trying to optimize. Yeah. Like you said, people live their lives not allowing themselves to rest until all their rings are closed.
Yeah.
So what's your solution to this? Because you've done this more than anyone. You have more risk than anyone because you're tracking more than anyone. How did you avoid it?
Well, yeah, it all really came from this quote. I think it's one of the chapters near the end starts with this. And the quote is, "We don't know how to measure what we value, so we value what we measure." And in its essence, that quote is all the world's problems in one quote. We don't know how to measure what we value, so we value what we measure.
Yeah.
And I think the quote in the book is, "We don't know how to measure what we care about, so we care about what we measure." I don't even think I had value in there. And in that way, I think so often an interface is given to you to mediate a relationship and ends up teaching you what to care about, which is fine, right? Let's be honest, right? That's a good beginning step. But for me, to how did I avoid the pitfalls? It really started after, the book ends with me meeting my spouse in my late 40s and saying, okay, how I lived my life up until this point was really good for me, but I don't know if it's good for we. And just saying to my partner at the time, what do you value? And then we're like, what do you mean by value? I'm like, what guides how you make your decisions? Right? And that's a really important thing to me. When I talk about values, I don't really mean the kind of traditional values that you would think of, like honesty, et cetera, but what is the unspoken system you came to the world with, regardless of the outside influences and trauma and experiences? What is the thing that, regardless of where you are, guides your decisions before they're influenced by everything else? And those are values. So, when I think about today, again, when we talked about this podcast being a service right? My system. That's important. I just think, before you measure anything, you should really write down what you care about. And then make sure that is the lowest common denominator, right? So just like in math, you take a fraction and reduce it to the lowest common denominator. A lot of people say, I care about being healthier. And that means I'm going to measure my steps. Is really steps the healthy you're looking for? Is it steps? Or is it weight loss? Is it weight gain? Is it muscle mass? Is it BMI? Is it fluid intake? What is it? And is that really it? Is that what because I would say probably not. It would be, what would you do with your time when you reach that state? Because that's what you care about.
Yep.
Right. Getting there is just what you think you care about. Right.
Yep.
So I hope that made sense. Values is really a touchy thing to even start to bring up because it's all about time and decision making.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel not only with the individual, but with groups, a lot of our dysfunction is that we don't admit that we value different things as groups of people.
Yeah.
And we don't have a mechanism to prioritize the stuff that we agree on over the stuff that we don't agree on, or the stuff that, and if we as a group of people could agree on the top 100 values for the country, politicians would know what to do. Like they wouldn't, and they'd be like, hey, here's your list. You agreed on it. Let's go ahead and, tackle the first ones first. And not only as individuals, but as collectives, as groups of people, if we could just make it more explicit, there'll be a great value there.
Yeah. I mean, think about the United States. I mean, we just talk about the stock market, like we value that number, or the interest rates, we value that number.
Yep.
The atmosphere and the pollution and the carbon monoxide or the dioxide in the air. We don't talk about that number, to your point, like we all value something different. Like I get that, but we just need to reduce that to the lowest common denominator. Again, there's no stock market if there's no air or no electrical grid or places are flooding. There's no need to have a place if people can't be fed adequately, so.
Yeah. And so let's talk about your spirituality stack. You call these things stacks, right? So let's talk about your spirituality stack.
Yeah.
What is techno-paganism?
So my spirituality stack really started with kind of Memento Mori, and this, I really got into the whole idea of thinking about death and finite time in 2015, 2016. Really just, I became obsessed with it, almost unhealthy. And that kind of evolved me into, wow, I've collapsed time upon itself so much that I no longer know how to function. It's like I'm devastated by how finite, and all this kind of existentialism terror happened to me, which really led me to techno-paganism, right? Which is like, what are the things that I can have in my life that help me expand my sense of time? And I say techno-paganism because paganism, I think, is kind of a common denominator. I call it the boot ROM for humans, right? If everything was wiped out tomorrow and two people were left and they didn't have any knowledge or anything, what are the rituals, practices, and systems they would recreate? Paganism being more tied to the earth and larger systems, sun, moon, stars, other animals, etc. So I say techno-paganism because for me, it was just like, okay, how are those things expressed in technology? So to me, I just thought to myself, wow, I bet you there's a level of paganism inside of our technology. And I was like, I need to go hunt for this. I need to find the witchcraft in our devices, right? I need to find all of that supernatural stuff before we had organized religion and just woo-woo stuff. And it was really a kind of a really important journey. I started on 2016 and kind of finished up in 2018. And it kind of led me down this path of, wow, there's this root to our belief systems, even in our newest technology. A mouse is very much like a wand. And I've got a whole talk I do on techno-paganism. So today, when I talk about techno-paganism, for me, you can't see the room next to me, but there's a giant altar in there and all sorts of very witchy looking, culty stuff. But it's there again for me to understand what are some of the first tools: sticks, stones, dirt, water, elements of stuff, and how were they mixed and combined with our senses, and how do those just two very simple things work together? Techno-paganism for me is just a way to deal with the accelerationism of technology. So your technology makes you feel super speedy, but it could make you feel super slow. And I like to design technology that makes me feel super slow.
So one thought that came up when you were talking about going back to the earliest roots of paganism and something that would evolve on its own if we started. Made me think of George Carlin's sun worshiper bit, where he was trying to imagine to reinvent religion for himself. And he just became a sun worshiper because he said, well, I can see the sun and it treats me fine and it feeds everything that I need.
Plus, I mean, think about just like the moon. The moon is so much easier to deal with than a calendar. So you've got a moon cycle. You've got seasons, right? You get 3 months out of a season, right? You get 28 days out of a moon cycle. That's just so much easier than paying your mortgage on the first. If you could just pay it on the full moon. There's a mediation there that actually slows you down a bit. Sorry, I could go on about techno-paganism all day long.
Yeah, no, I love that stuff. So, I think one of the most powerful, because my degree is actually in religious studies. And I focused on Buddhism, but studied other religions as well. And looking at the roles of rituals is so essential. In fact, there are religions out there where they only have rituals. They don't have any ideology. They just have rituals. And there is, religions out there that are just dance. The whole religion is just getting together and dancing in a certain way. I'd love to hear, what are your rituals today that you've adopted that make you happy? Anything that you can share to give us a sense?
I have a really outrageously large journaling ritual that happens 3 times a day that I've been doing for about 3 years, where the opposite to the system I have that manages my life is I have one that manages my legacy. And that legacy system basically creates a record of each day that's very spiritual in nature, where I have an affirmation practice in the afternoon. Actually, I know we're not doing any video on this, but I was just getting ready to, when we were getting done, do mine. And you can see here that I've got a picture of our podcast probably on your screen right now. And you can see I just wrote down the word podcast, a little bit about, but again, in the morning, I have an inspiration I do in the morning and then a reflection. Also in the morning, I set my intention for the day and the things I want to help with protecting from the universe. In the afternoon, I have an affirmation that I give myself and a reflection. At night, I have a gratitude practice and a reflection practice I do. When you talk about the rituals I have that help me in my day, I'd say this is an amazingly fantastical one. I built this system to create a spiritual version of myself. I had a very organized, hyper-optimized version, the one that everyone likes to talk about, but I didn't have the God Chris. And this was an effort to put that into practice. The other thing I do is that has, it's away from a screen, if you will, is I do moon and seasonal ceremonies. So new moon, full moon, first quarter, last quarter, and then season changes. I live in the Northern Hemisphere. So I have rituals involved with celebrating those. One of the things I shared with you earlier is all the moon that I will consume in one moon 20 month. All that water is put outside during the full moon. I only drink that water, the full moon water for the month. Right? So if I had a bottle of water to come to the sink, it's water that was left out in the moon. And seasonally, I have, very large esoteric seasonal practices. I have an entire system that I created on a tool called Miro, where I'll basically come in at the beginning of each season and then really talk about the things that were kind of important to me and set some intentions around that season. And they can be silly intentions. They can be very, thoughtful intentions. I also have something that's very ritualistic. On Sundays, my family and I sit down. We talk about where we did well and where we could have done better with our values each week using mirrors. I have a lot of things that are ritualistic that I do, but some of them involve, well, that's kind of weird. Who puts their moon water out and celebrates the seasons? And witches and pagans. Who talks about their values and who sits down and constructs these elaborate Miro boards for those? Well, again, techno-pagans. So again, I think at the end of the day, I loved when you talk about some religions are just ritual. Maybe if there's one thing you take away from this podcast is go create a ritual about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And some of these things are a dream of mine and I don't currently have a family, but to have a family ritual where you talk about your values and how you did this week and how you did. I mean, I think that's like Scrum for the soul or Scrum for,
Yes, it's exactly what the people who've seen it say that. And what's amazing is my spouse doesn't really do tasks and lists and things don't work for him, but intentions do. Right. And then, they really doesn't do perspective, but reflection works. Again, just finding a way to talk to each other through each other. It's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of my dreams is to create a ritual wiki where everybody can upload their favorite
Yeah.
rituals, and then people can go and find and embrace the ones that they work, because they're so important. And I think that's something that the modern world could help with, actually, is find your.
Yeah.
And there'll be ritual stacks. You could go to the Buddhist stack and find like a bunch of rituals, or you can mix and match.
I built something called the Habit Store that has little stacks in it.
Oh, nice.
If you just check out thehabitstore.io, there's a tab on thehabitstore.io that tells you kind of my habit domains or habit stacks. Again, productivity, health, value, nature, transcendent habits. And then what I do is I actually go in and help people then find the technology I love to use by either habit stack or what type of feeling, or what type of thing. So is it a plugin? Is it a web thing? Is it a membership? But I also do them by feeling. So if you need to feel, if you're feeling uninspired, you can just filter the list and it'll show you the tools I use to feel inspired.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I didn't know about this website, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
You'd be so mad at me. I have so much cool stuff. I just think there's so much content out there for people, and I just don't want to give people more crap. So much of the stuff I've put out for people, it's really hyper personal. I only share it with a few people. So hopefully you don't have a lot of listeners, and people don't know this. Find the Habit Store.
Oh, they'll find it. No, so so in his TED Talk, the philosopher Alain de Botton talks about the difference between a lecture and a sermon. A lecture being a dry, informational way of conveying some knowledge, and you take what you want from it. It's your choice. And a sermon being this urgent plea to change your life in a really important way. And it takes you seriously, and it wants what's best for you, and it grabs you by the collar. So if you had a chance to give a short sermon, what would it be about?
Dying, the importance of dying. We so underestimate the value of death. We cling to everything as if it's going to be here forever and then act surprised when it's gone, whether it's money in the bank or a love affair or our bodies. But there is so much wisdom in embracing and dying. Death doulas, are the closest thing to angels we have on earth. And their doulas are these people who help people transition. But man, I would love to give a good sermon on the value of death.
The value of death. You heard it here first. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate your time so much today. This was an amazing conversation.
Oh, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Remake is produced by myself and Regina Rothstein. Research and editing by Louis Brady. And audio engineering by Greg Cocoveos. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also just makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We're a global strategic design speed agency aimed at improving outcomes through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well, everyone, and see you next week on Remake.